Think of a factory as an actual factory. Right? Think of a car factory, for example, right? Stuff goes in, raw material, I don't know, metal and plastic and all these things go in, and the factory does a bunch of things to them, and a final product, let's say car, comes out. Factory functions aren't that different. Let me show you what I mean. What is a factory function in JavaScript, and why do you need one, and where would you even use one? Is this just a big theoretical word, or is it actually useful to you as a JavaScript developer? This is a 10-part series I'm calling 10 things JavaScript developers should know but probably don't. This is episode 3, Factory Functions. Let's go.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
A factory function is just a function that creates objects and returns them. That's it. But wait a minute. Why do I need a function to create objects? Can't I just do this? Well, that's an object. Sure you can, Craig. But there are a couple problems here, especially if you're making more than just one object, and especially if all of those objects have a lot in common with small differences. Well, what does that mean? Imagine we want to create objects that would represent all of your family members, for example, right? And we want to have a talk function on each of those objects that announces who that member is, what their name is. I'll show you what I mean. Let's use my family, for example, to the browser. So let's start with a me object, right? Const, let's refresh actually. Me equals, it's an object that has a name. Well, let's start with just the function, talk function, and it returns, hello, I am Sina, right? Let's create a similar one for my brother Ben. Hello, I am Ben, right? Me.talk, hello, I am Sina, Ben.talk. Hello, I am Ben, right? So one slightly better approach would be, I'm gonna refresh. For me, would be actually for both of them would be to have a name property, right? And in here I can say this.name, and I'm insane. And then one for Ben, Benno, and the function then stays the same, right? So it's like a layer of abstraction. So me.talk. Okay, and Ben.talk. Cool, so it works as before. But we still have two big problems here, right? Well, for one thing, if I change the value of me, well, let's take a look at me. Me has name and talk, and same with Ben. Ben has name and talk. So one problem is if I change me.name to Sam, right? Now if I do me.talk, now it's completely wrong, right? So the fact that the name property is exposed, right? It's available for me to overwrite. That's where a lot of the bugs come from, where my talk function, which is supposed to announce me, who is Sina, now has a defect in it. But the defect itself doesn't actually belong to the talk function, but the talk function does something that we don't expect. So it's like it's hard to know where the problem is, but that's one of the downsides of the code that I have up here for us, right? And two, which is it's a much bigger problem, it's a much bigger issue in my opinion, is that the talk function had to be written twice, right? I've already covered why code duplication is bad a lot in this series. Over here or here, I'm not sure where. Oh, here, yeah, here. But I've also done a 1-minute version of that, again, over here or somewhere. So that's just in 60 seconds, I explain why that's a problem, right? So you don't have 60 seconds, dude? Come on. Now imagine if I had 5 objects here. I would have to write this talk function 5 times, even more in real projects. It's very common to have tens, sometimes hundreds of objects. So how would you test that? Would you go ahead and test 100 objects one by one? That's not good. You don't want to write your logic more than once, even twice. I mean, forget 5 or 10 times. You only want to be writing it once. Trust me. Someone reached out to me on TikTok and replied to me and said, oh, I'll just use find and replace because I use VS Code. Really? No, don't do that. That's not what find and replace is for. Don't cover up your terrible code using these random solutions. There are better tools for this, right? And one of them is using better code patterns or design patterns. Factory functions are just one of those design patterns. Think of a factory or a factory function as an actual factory. Right? Think of a car factory, for example, right? Stuff goes in, raw material, I don't know, metal and plastic and all these things go in, and the factory does a bunch of things to them, and a final product, let's say a car, comes out. Factory functions aren't that different. Let me show you what I mean. Let's shrink one more time. Whoop. So let's create a factory function that will do the exact same thing we were doing before with the members of the family. So I'm going to create a function, call it person factory, right? And it takes a name. So that would be like a raw material if we're making a car. In this case, we're making a person, which sounds weird. We're not making a person. We're creating a simple JavaScript object that includes some information about a person. Right, so let's do that, and it creates const object equals, I'm gonna create an object and give it a name. The shorthand can be name, ES6 life, so this is the same as doing this. I'm just gonna say name. And then talk, which it's going to have the same logic return. What did I have? Hello, I am name. I don't even need this actually. So I can just do that through the miracle of closures. So how can I then use this factory function? Well, const me equals person factory, and I'm going to pass in the name Sina me.talk. What happens? Oh, fascinating. So I'm going to have to write this again. I forgot to return the object, right? Factory functions return the object, but instead of returning object like this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to not create a constant. I'm just going to return the object. Same thing, right? Then I'm going to say const me equals what was it? Person factory with my name. Now me.talk does that. And what's great about this is that I can't even do me.name equals, me.name is undefined. I can't even create a bug if I wanted to. Let's take a look at the me object. It just has the talk function on it, right? Let's create another object. Const ben equals person factory ben.talk. Fantastic. Let's create another one. How about a Jill? Const Jill equals person factory, and I'm gonna pass in Jill. Actually, you know what I'm gonna pass in? Dr. Jill. Cool. Jill.talk. Madam First Lady. Hello, Dr. Jill. Salute. All right, so now what if we had 10 people or 100 people? We should not be repeating ourselves. Like I said, that business logic of, the hello, I am name, that could be a lot more complicated. And the fact that it's written in one place, that means that if we have any sort of bug, that's the one place we have to look, and we don't have to look in 10 or 100 different places. And one of the things I mentioned in the beginning is that our objects have a lot in common, meaning the talk function is all exactly the same, with the exception of one tiny thing, which is the name itself. So we can isolate what's common inside the factory function and just write it one time. And we can make the part that is different for each object or for each person. That part can be dynamic and done through a parameter that we passed into our factory function. So just to reiterate, what is so great about this factory function, right? First, it's simple. It's just a function. There's no setup, there's no fuss. It's just a function, and it's really easy to read. As opposed to something like a class that requires a constructor, and sometimes you have to call super, and And classes are great. Don't get me wrong. Classes have their place. And I'm not saying don't use classes, but for this simple example, for our requirements, a factory function is pretty good. When you have to write less code, I'm all for that. Second is, I already covered it, no duplicate code. Our logic is isolated in one place. And third, you have data privacy, right? We also covered that. I can't even change the name of any of these objects, even if I wanted to. So the name itself is sort of protected inside that inner function that is part of our object. I'll give you one more example real quick, and this is a slightly more practical example. Back to the browser, dun 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 dun, browser. Do you know what that's from? Yeah, all right. So back to the browser, shrink. This example, say we want to create a bunch of HTML elements. Let me refresh function, create element. All right, and we have to pass in a type of element. Let's say I want an H1 or a paragraph or whatnot. What is the text that goes inside, and what is the color, right? So let's say that's what our factory function creates. First, it creates an element equals document create element of type because we already passed that in. And then what does our, let's say we added, let's say our factory function is responsible for adding our element to the body. Not a great idea because the factory function is not supposed to do stuff like that, but let's say that's part of our business logic, right? So humor me for a second, dot append body dot append L. So let's say that's another thing that is common between all of these elements. And then we want to set the inner text. Actually, let's do that up here. So we want to change the text to be the text that we passed in. And let's say we want to change the color. I think it's style or styles. The color equals color. And then we add that to the body, and then we return an object that has a reference to the element. So let's say that that's what I want to do. Again, shorthand is just L. And then we want to expose a few methods, a few functions that our element that we can perform on our element. For example, set text, right? And let's say we want to change the text of the element. Here, what I can do is L.inner text. So exactly what I'm doing up there equals text. And I want to expose another function, which is very similar to this. Set color to another color. And what is this? Style.color. It's kind of a contrived example. I understand that because we already have the DOM API, and we don't necessarily have to create all these functions, but I'm trying to prove a point. So let's see. Let's say I want to create an H1 equals create element of type H1. So this H1, by the way, is just the name of my variable, has nothing to do with the type of element I'm creating. But here I'm passing H1 that will be set as the type. Then the text I want to put in there, hey guys, and then the color I want to pass in red, right? So H1, let's take a look at H1. H1 has a reference to the element of H1, which is, whoa, that's crazy. And then it has a set color function and it has a set text. But when we first created it, we changed the text and the color. So let's take a look. H1, let's look at the element. Actually, I guess I can click on this and go here. I didn't even know I could do that. So it set the color to red and the inner text to hey guys. I'm gonna go back and let's use one of the methods. Set text. Let's say I want to change that to goodbye fellas, right? And now if I look at H1, I'm actually gonna drill in and look for it in here. Inner text and inner HTML are both set to goodbye fellas. So we have a reference to this element. So let's say I wanted to create a bunch of different elements, right? I can create a paragraph, and all I have to specify is what the type that I want, and the text that's going in there, and the color, right? Blue, let's say I have a P. Let's take a look at the paragraph element. You get the point, but I'm gonna really hammer it in. Let's see, color, that would be under style. Let's see, style, and we can already tell that the color is set. If I go down to color, it's set to blue, right? Didn't happen magically, it didn't happen through by itself. It's the logic that we wrote for our elements. So we abstracted away all the randomness of all the DOM manipulation that we had to write, reference to document, to create element. All that stuff is all isolated in this function, and all we have to do now is just call that function and pass it the information it needs to create that type of element. Again, I understand this is a kind of a contrived example, and we already have the DOM API to interact with the DOM, so you don't necessarily need to create functions like this, but it is nicer, right? It's nice that we can create elements and not have to repeat those steps and create these APIs that are cleaner, or in my opinion, are cleaner, rather than setting the color of the style object inside the element. I can just say set color to blue, and I don't have to write that logic multiple times. It belongs to every object that I'm going to create using this factory function. All right, so hopefully that made sense. This is the basics of factory functions. This has been episode 3 of this 10-part series I'm calling 10 things JavaScript developers should know but probably don't. I'll see you in the next one, which is constructor functions, where I talk about some of the shortcomings of factory functions. They're not perfect. They have some issues where constructor function can come in and actual inheritance can come in and solve those problems for us. I'll see you in the next one, and until then, salut.